What's up, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the CBB Yapper. Today, we have a lot to talk about. First, we'll start off recapping some of the biggest matchups that we've already got to see to start off our week. Then, we'll get into this Charles Bediako situation a little bit, what happened, and what that means for Bama moving forward. And we'll end it, of course, with some of the biggest games to watch for this upcoming loaded slate of college basketball we have coming this weekend. So without further ado, let's get into it. The first game that I wanted to talk about that I had pointed out on Sunday's episode was that NC State and Louisville game. This was definitely not what I had expected, but certainly helped my Louisville agenda that I have been pushing here recently. I had said on Sunday's episode that if Louisville wanted a chance to win this game, Michael Brown needed to look like the best player on the floor, and it seemed like he at least heard me or heard somebody because he had an incredible night. I have been pounding the table for this kid all year. I think he is absolutely one of the best freshmen in the nation and think he just proved that on Monday night. He was absolutely electric and poured in 45 points, which broke the ACC freshman scoring record set by Cooper Flagg last year. So just an incredible and really impressive game for Michael. And I said it before and I'll say it again. Watch out for this Louisville team. They are very good, and that backcourt can compete with anyone's in the nation. If they get hot, they can beat anyone. I am really high on this Louisville team and think that this matchup really just proved that I am at least on the right track with this Louisville team. But on the other hand, just a really ugly loss for NC State and really disappointing night for the Wolfpack. They never really looked competitive at all in this one. One thing that did seem to be a glaring issue for the Wolfpack was the boards. They just got dominated on the boards and got out-rebounded by 14. They really didn't have anyone holding down the paint other than Van Lubin, which seems to be the only center on roster that they play. But it was definitely a glaring issue that could be something that gets them bounced in the first weekend of March if they are not careful. I think they definitely need to start hitting the boards a little bit more aggressively, especially on defense, but even on offense. They need to start getting a little more extra opportunities on offense. But they have a really tough stretch of games coming up here, 3 really tough matchups in a row with Miami, UNC, and UVA. So I think it'll be really interesting to check back on them here in a week and see how they handle that gauntlet. But yeah, the ACC is shaping up right now. There's a bunch of good teams in the ACC, but I really only think that there's one elite team. And yeah, if Duke is without Gungba for a while here, we'll talk about this a little bit later. They might not have an elite team just because I think without him, that definitely hurts Duke's chances of being a contender, but we will talk about that later. Staying on Monday night, I had also, of course, pointed out that Kansas and Arizona game. This game still ended up being a fantastic game and wasn't a letdown, despite Darren Peterson, once again, missing another big game for Kansas, which at this point, I'm getting personally extremely annoyed with this. Like, it's just honestly getting really annoying to just see this kid constantly sitting out of games. I do believe that he probably was actually sick. I'm not saying that he wasn't sick. However, there have been other college basketball players, even in this year, play through flu-like illnesses and through the flu. So, like, to me, I do think it is something that he could have certainly played through. AJ DeBanza just played through a flu-like illness a couple weeks ago. Dame Sarr and Caleb Foster both just played a game with the flu a couple weeks ago. So I personally do not really want to hear the flu excuse. When you have a huge team like Arizona, the number 1 team in the nation, coming to Allen Fieldhouse, and you still can't play for that one, yeah, that one definitely leaves a little bit of a sour taste in my mouth. And this one has been the most telling seeding from Peterson, in my opinion. I think this one was clearly the worst one. He went out and tried to partake in warm-ups, so I don't want to hear anything about being contagious or anything like that, because he clearly felt good enough to go out in warm-ups and potentially get his teammates sick. But so I don't want to hear anything about him being contagious towards the other players. And again, Plenty of other players have played through flu-like illnesses this year already. So I don't really want to hear that as an excuse. The only thing I will say is I'm seeing people say that this would deter them from drafting him with the number 1 overall pick. That, I think, is way overblown and going way too far. I think Peterson is clearly the most talented player in college, at least in terms of NBA game translation. I don't really think that that's even arguable, honestly, at this point. He is incredible, and his game is clearly suited for the NBA. I think the other players like Boozer, DeBansa, Flemings, Michael Brown, Caleb Wilson, they all have at least some questions about their games and how it will translate to the NBA. I do not think that Peterson has any of those questions in terms of talent. However, it is definitely at least a concern at this point, and something that I am at least starting to get concerned with, just because I personally do not know how you can sit out of a game like this. It's the biggest game of the year. You're taking on the number 1 team in the nation at your home court, and you still can't play in this one. That one definitely left a little bit of a sour taste in my mouth here, but I do think NBA GMs are going to start questioning his motivations at least shortly here, but I still think he's certainly well worth the number 1 overall pick. Despite that controversy and him not playing again, Bediako certainly showed up to play. His matchup with Pete was the one that I was excited for and one that I had pointed out on Sunday's episode, and Bediako definitely did not disappoint. Pete disappointed pretty largely, but Bediako was awesome. He was an absolute monster on Monday night defensively and had a really efficient night on offense as well. I think this Kansas team has just been playing extremely well here recently, especially with doing it mostly without Darren Peterson. I think that's just really impressive to be doing this without him on the floor. But yeah, in my first episode, I had said that Kansas is an elite team and someone that I think is going to end up back in the top 10 at some point. And I think they are here right now. I think that they could even crawl up into a 2 seed at some point by the end of the year, just due to how they're playing right now. But yeah, they are just one of the best teams in the nation and playing like it. Bediako has had an incredible resurgence here and has been playing some really good ball. Bryson Tiller has been playing some great ball as well. So yeah, they are just going to continue to get better as the year goes on. And if they add Peterson back and he is fully healthy for the tournament, I think they can absolutely cut down the nets in April. But for Arizona, it was just a really rough game. Pete got handled by Bediako pretty much all night. But Burries showed up and had a really solid game for them, and I thought he was really impressive. It was a really good game from him, just wasn't enough to pull off the win here in Allen Fieldhouse, which is just an extremely tough place to play. Just a great game throughout, but when you have 2 of the top teams in the nation facing off against each other, unfortunately, one of them does have to lose, and it was Arizona on Monday night. The next game I had circled for this week was the Purdue and Nebraska game. This was just another awesome game that really didn't feel like it throughout. It was just kind of really odd. A couple of different times throughout it, it really looked like Purdue was going to blow the lid off of this one and run Nebraska off their home court. But Nebraska just kept battling and battling the entire time. Purdue ended up taking a 22-point lead, I believe, early in the second half. And it looked like I said, Nebraska was just on the ropes and about to get dumped. But, man, I thought their fight was just extremely impressive. They battled back immediately and ended up bringing this one to overtime. Of course, they did still fall short in overtime, but they salvaged what could have been a bad loss and what could have been a blowout and made it a pretty positive look for their resume, in my opinion. I think that Purdue needed this one more than Nebraska, and that certainly showed. And their defense against Sanford was really impressive. They held him to 4 of 12 from the field, which is very uncharacteristic for him. He has been a very efficient player all year, and he just did not look comfortable all night. Purdue has a really tough stretch coming up here. They got 4 games in a row that I think are at least solid matchups for them. They have Iowa, who is a team that gave them a run for their money the first time around. Indiana, who beat them the first time around. And then they get both of the Michigan teams in Michigan and Michigan State, which are obviously going to be very tough matchups. I think Purdue needs to go 3-1 in this stretch just to bolster their ranking and climb a little bit in seeding. But I expect them to go 2-2. I think that they'll beat Iowa and Indiana and lose to Michigan and Michigan State, just because I do think Michigan and Michigan State are a little bit better than them as of right now. But just a really tough stretch for them coming up. And even if they do go 2-2, that is not something to hold your head over as a Boilermaker fan. But yeah, just a really tough stretch for them coming up. Nebraska gets an easy bounce back game against Northwestern before a slightly tougher matchup with Iowa. But yeah, the Big Ten is an elite conference. I personally think that they're the second best conference in the nation right now behind the Big 12. But yeah, the Big Ten is just setting us up for a bunch of great matchups on a nightly basis here till the end of the year, and I am looking forward to see how this conference shapes up. Up next, I had pointed out the Duke and Pitt game. Obviously, I only pointed this one out because I am a Duke fan. But yeah, Duke fans have just not had a very fun past couple of days here. I was excited to see Duke get a chance to get a blowout win here and shake off some of that bad juju from Saturday's loss. But then Pat Gungba was ruled out of the game a couple hours before tip-off. And seeing what John Shire said after the game in his press conference about Gungba really made me sick to my stomach. It seems like Duke is going to be without Gungba here for a decent stretch, which is just a really, really big loss here for the Blue Devils. He had been playing especially well here recently and would have been a huge piece in the game on Saturday had he been allowed to play defense there. Duke still pulled this one off by 16, but the Gungba news makes me just sick to my stomach. Like I said, they're really going to need him if they want a chance to cut down the nets in April. I really do think that he is that important of a piece for this Duke team. For the time being, I think that we should still be able to make do and stay competitive and still should be able to beat teams like Clemson that we have coming up this weekend. But yeah, it's definitely going to be a tough ask. It certainly will not be an easy task and will not be easy to do undermanned, but huge shout out to Isaiah Evans and Caleb Foster in this one. I thought that they were really awesome and really shook off a lot of the doubt that some of Duke fans have been placing on them recently. Isaiah Evans was even benched by Shire for the first 7-ish minutes of the second half. And then when he came into the second half, it looked like he had his hair lit on fire. So I think that that was just a really smart play by John. I think it gave him the kick in the butt that he needed to show that the production he was giving at that moment was just not enough, especially for what he has been touted as coming back to Duke. I think that he's going to continue to get better. He is an absolute flamethrower and a great piece on offense, and I really like that he has added a drive to his game. He's not just pulling shots anymore from outside. He is a big threat to get to the rim. Just not the greatest finisher yet, but he had a great game on Tuesday night at least, and I wanted to tip my cap to him for how he responded to getting benched in the first 7 minutes of that half. But even with the development of Dame Sarr as well, he has been awesome to watch as well. He's had 2 great games in a row, and he was already a great perimeter defender coming into these games, but his offensive game is really starting to click here, and I think that's something that is going to start to climb him up some NBA mock draft boards here really shortly, unfortunately. I'd love to see him return for another year at Duke, but I just think the way he's trending, he's going to be a really intriguing pick for some GMs come that draft in May. But yeah, Duke really needs to find a way to pull this one off against Clemson on Saturday to maintain their lead in the ACC. If they do drop this one, it will most likely at least be a 2-way tie for first between Duke and Clemson, but Virginia could potentially be tied for first as well. Next up, I had pointed out this Illinois and Wisconsin game, and this Wisconsin team is just really fun to watch. Like I said on Sunday, if Illinois didn't want to show up and play, Wisconsin would have no problem pulling this one off, and that is exactly what happened. Wisconsin jumped out to a pretty big lead in the first half right away, but Illinois immediately stormed back and took a lead going into the half. But even in the second half, it looked like Illinois had a pretty firm grasp on the game, but just did not pull away and just kept letting Wisconsin stay in the game, which is exactly what you cannot do against this Badgers team. Wisconsin just stayed in striking distance the entire time, and that was all they needed. I thought Illinois would pull away at the end. Like I said on Sunday, I said that I think Wisconsin will keep it close for majority of the game, and Illinois will pull away at the end. That just did not happen. Illinois just did not get buckets at the end of the game to pull away, and credit to the Badgers for sticking in it and fighting for a full 45 minutes, because there were plenty of times where they could have hung their head or tucked their tail between their legs and just gave up and rolled over, but they did not, and they're just a really fun team to watch. Like I said, they're just really odd. They seem to play up to competition, but then also play down to competition. However, this is just a really scary team come March, I think. They now have two of the best wins in the nation, and if teams are not careful in March with this Wisconsin team, they can certainly take down anyone, as they have proven now twice. Illinois, on the other hand, has now dropped 2 in a row after being one of the hottest teams in the nation, arguably the hottest team in the nation. I still think that they're absolutely elite. I don't think that this game necessarily changed my opinion on that for them. I think that they have a real chance of making the Elite Eight and potentially a Final Four, but they're really going to need to bounce back against 4 quality opponents here in a row. They get Indiana, USC, and UCLA, and then they end the month against Michigan. So just a really tough upcoming slate for them. I think they go at least 3-1 in this stretch. They're going to want to go 4-0, obviously. Anything less than 3-1 in this stretch, though, I think would be a letdown for the Illini. I think the Big Ten is really starting to get interesting here as the year comes to a close, and a lot of these teams, I think, can at least win a game in March. I think the Big Ten is filled with a lot of good teams here, and it'll be fun to see how this conference shapes up as we get to the close of the year. Up next, I had pointed out Florida versus Georgia. This was kind of what I expected, but not what I was hoping for. I had pointed this one out because I wanted to get another look at Florida. They have been one of my favorite teams to watch, and the team that I think is just clearly the best team out of the SEC right now, and they just flat out dominated this one from start to finish. I don't think Georgia even held a lead at any single point in the game. Credit to Georgia for one thing, they kept it from getting out of hand. There were plenty of times that it felt like Florida was just going to stomp on them and just blow them out of the gym, but then Georgia clawed back at least a little bit. They made it interesting several times throughout the second half, but Florida just immediately responded each time with a run of their own. I think this is a team that is elite and probably going to make the Elite Eight again this year. I have been high on them all year, and they are playing great here recently, so I think they're starting to try and prove me right in that aspect. I just said last episode that I think they're clearly the best team in the ACC, and think that this game just pretty much reinforced that, and do not think that's really up for discussion at this point. They have a huge game against Kentucky that I'll talk about here upcoming, but I like the Gators' chance to keep their momentum going through this weekend, and yeah, I think that they're just going to continue their dominance of the SEC here. Georgia really needs to bounce back here. They get Oklahoma before also getting Kentucky next Tuesday, so going to be interesting to see if Georgia can bounce back before another big matchup against Kentucky. But yeah, it'll be interesting to follow the SEC here as well going towards the end of the year. Like I said, I'm just not really impressed with the SEC as a whole. I really do think that they're just a bunch of good teams beating up on each other aside from Florida. I do think Florida is an elite team, but I don't think anybody else is. I think the voters are placing way too much confidence in the SEC this year, and I expect the first weekend of the tournament to reflect that. I honestly see Florida as the only team in the SEC right now that I can confidently say will make it out of the first weekend. Really quick, before we get into this absolutely loaded upcoming slate of college basketball we have for this weekend, I did want to briefly talk about the Charles Bediako situation and what happened here. It does seem like this saga has officially come to an end. It does look like his preliminary injunction against the NCAA was officially denied by the new judge assigned to the case after the Bama booster recused himself from it. So now Bama does seem like they will have to go the remainder of the season without Bediako. Personally, I think this was a huge win for the NCAA. I am certainly not someone who is rooting for the NCAA in most of these cases, but in this specific case, I do think that they needed to win this one for the future of college basketball, especially now with Amari Bailey being the latest one to try and test this NBA G League back to college pipeline. I think this case and ruling can kind of thwart some of those attempts potentially in the future. It's definitely not over. I do want to repeat that. This is definitely not over, and I continue to expect others to try and seek reinstatement in college basketball and get some of their remaining eligibility reinstated. But this case might be something that can help the NCAA down the road, at least in terms of arguing it in court. As for Bama, I've talked about this recently a couple times. I didn't really want to give an analysis on them until this situation was fully resolved. Personally, I'd like to get a couple more games of watching them before I give them a full analysis, just because it's been a while since they've played without Bediako. I believe they played 5 games with him, so it has been quite some time that they've had without him. So I would like to see how they're going to maneuver going forward without him on the roster. So I'm going to hold off from giving a complete take on them. However, I do think that they are still not an elite team. I think that they're good, but this loss of Bediako has hurt their defensive capabilities a lot, I think, especially in terms of rim protection. I think Bediako was a very good addition for them. Obviously, he was a G League player, so he was levels above most players in college. But yeah, I think that he was a big piece for them, but I don't think he's necessarily the piece that put them over the edge and put them in the realm of contenders. But yeah, I do think that this is a huge loss for them. He was a very solid and a very good rim protector, and is something that they're going to need to find without him. But yeah, I just think that this is a good team. I think they can potentially win a game in March, but other than that, I don't think I'd take them much further. I really don't see them making it out of the first round without Bediako. I think this is just going to be a really big wrench in their plans for the season. Moving on from the Charles Bediako situation and that finally being resolved, I did want to provide you guys some of the games that I have circled for this loaded upcoming slate of college basketball that we get this weekend. And that's going to start on Friday night with Michigan State and Wisconsin. Like I said earlier, this Wisconsin team is just really fun to watch, and I'm honestly probably just going to circle every single game that they have against a top 25 team from here on out. They have continued to play up and down to competition all year and get another chance to add another huge win to their resume here against Michigan State. Of course, this one will not be easy. Michigan State is a very good team, but so is Illinois, and that game was not easy either. So I am looking forward to this one. I think Wisconsin absolutely has a chance to pull this one off, but if Michigan State is going to pull this one off, I think they're going to need another big game from Fears. He has been playing incredibly as of recently. It's just he has also not been able to keep his hands to himself, which they will need him to do in this one so that he can play the entire game. I think Wisconsin's a very dangerous team, like I said, but I don't really like their odds in this one. I think especially after that huge emotional win that they got against Illinois, I think this is just a letdown spot for the Badgers. However, I'm definitely not going to count them out. They definitely need to keep this one close to potentially boost their resume and seeding for the upcoming March Madness tournament. But I certainly think that they have a shot to win it. I just don't think that they will on this night. I think it's a very tough task to ask Wisconsin to take down 2 top 15 teams in a row. But I like their chances to at least keep this one close, and looking forward to hopefully a good matchup on Friday night. Staying with Friday night, I have a little bit of a less notable matchup here, but on a less loaded slate and not many games to watch, I wanted to get another look at Miami, Ohio versus Ohio. I gave a little bit of a rant about them last episode and just think that they have been receiving a little too much disrespect here recently, and just wanted to get another chance to view them against their in-state rival here. They take on the Ohio Bobcats, who are currently tied for 4th in the MAC. I think Miami, Ohio should win this one fairly easily, but with a lackluster slate on Friday, I wanted to show the Red Hawks some love here. And if you haven't gotten a chance to look at them, I think Friday night is a perfect opportunity. I think they're just a very good team and very well coached, and looking forward to get another eye on them on Friday night versus their in-state rivals. Moving on to Saturday, I of course have Duke versus Clemson circled as the first game that I'll be watching. As I mentioned earlier, it seems like Duke will be without Pat Gungba for this matchup, which is going to be a huge blow and will play a major role in this game, I believe. Clemson just dropped a tough one to Virginia Tech last night, so they will certainly be hungry to pull this one off on Saturday. Clemson is a very solid team. I don't think that they're necessarily elite or great, but they are definitely a good team and play great team basketball. As I noted on previous episodes, they do not necessarily have a bona fide or certified stud on their roster, but they have a bunch of good players who know how to play their role and play their role well. If Duke wants to win this one, I think they're going to need two things. One, they're going to need a great game from their tandem of guards in Dame Sarr, Caleb Foster, and Isaiah Evans. I think if they can get them to have an elite game, or at least two of them to have an elite game, I like their odds in this one and think that they should be able to pull this one off by 5+. But I think that is also going to go in unison with the other piece that I think they're going to need to watch out for, and that is keeping Boozer and Malik Brown out of foul trouble. Without Gungba, they just do not have any depth at the big man position and really no front court depth at all. If they want a chance to pull this one off, they're going to need Malik Brown and Cam Boozer to be able to play the entire game, and they're going to have to refrain from picking up any dumb fouls at all. They just cannot afford to pick up fouls. If anyone's fouling, it needs to be the guards for Duke. But yeah, they're really going to need Malik Brown and Cam Boozer to have probably the cleanest games that they've had all year in order to pull this one off, because Clemson is a very good team, and if Duke is not playing at their highest level, they can certainly drop this one very easily. Later on Saturday, we get another great matchup in Kansas and Iowa State. Just another awesome matchup in the Big 12, and seems like this is just something that we're going to be getting blessed with on a nightly basis almost for the rest of the year out of the Big 12. Iowa State is a team that I had gotten a little bit down on after their rough stretch about a month ago, but now they are trending right back up and playing as good as anybody in the nation. This will really be a tough one for Kansas, who I have been very high on recently, and especially if Peterson cannot go. And honestly, at this point, I don't even want to speculate that Peterson is going to play. I feel like it's better to just speculate that he will not play and then be surprised and ecstatic when he does end up playing, if he does. I think it's just a safer bet to say he won't be playing at this point. Honestly, that I just don't want to keep getting myself let down when he is eventually ruled out of yet another game. And especially with this being another elite matchup, this seems to be the type of game that he does not like to play in. So yeah, definitely not getting my hopes up for him playing in this one. Even if he doesn't play, though, Kansas has been playing incredibly recently, even without him on the court, and just took the best team in the nation down without him. So I think they will be okay regardless. I'm just looking forward to another great top 10 matchup out of the Big 12, which, like I said, seems like we are going to be getting on a nightly basis from here on out. The next game that I have circled on that Saturday slate is the Florida and Kentucky game. I had mentioned this game briefly earlier, but I just think that this is two of the best teams in the SEC right now facing off against each other and hoping for a good matchup. Like I said, Florida, I think, is clearly the best team in the SEC right now and do not really think that is arguable and think that they're going to continue to prove that here on Saturday. Kentucky, however, has been playing some great ball recently, especially with all of the injuries that they've been dealing with. So I think that they've been playing very impressively here recently. If Kentucky wants to win this one, though, they're going to need two big games from Otega-Oweh and Moreno. I think Oweh is going to need to have an awesome game on offense and is going to need to dominate for the Wildcats if they want a chance to pull this one off. But on the other hand, Moreno is really going to have a solid game on defense to slow down this trio of big men that Florida Gators have. Like we mentioned a couple episodes ago, Moreno has seemingly been one of the best rim protectors in the nation, and I think that will be huge for Kentucky to have if they want a chance to pull this one off. If they can get two great games from these two, I think they have a chance to pull this one off and shock a couple people, but I fully expect Florida to continue their dominant run here in the SEC and continue to prove that they are the best team in the SEC. As of right now, like I said earlier, I just really think that the SEC is just not that good. I think that they are a good conference, but they are definitely a little bit overblown, and I think that their records and rankings are more reflective of them beating up on each other in their conference. But Florida is an absolutely elite team, and I'm excited to get another eye on them this weekend. Moving down the slate here, I have yet another awesome Big 12 game, which is shocking, I know, but this is just another matchup between two teams that I think are absolutely elite. I personally think that the Big 12 and the Big 10 are the two best conferences this year. Not really sure if that's too arguable. However, the one thing I do think is arguable is which one is better. And I personally think the Big 12 holds a slight edge over them just due to matchups like this happening on a daily basis, it seems, in the Big 12. But Arizona, of course, just lost that tough one to Kansas on Monday night, so they are really going to be looking for a big bounce back opportunity here. But on the other hand, Texas Tech has been one of my favorite teams to watch all year, and I think they have the best player in the nation that no one is talking about right now, or at least not talking about him enough. I think this game just has another really good individual matchup between Toppin and Pete. I'm really excited to see these two go back and forth, especially after Pete struggled a lot against Badunga. I think this is just another really tough matchup for him in a different way. Badunga is certainly a much better defender than Toppin, but Toppin is a much better offensive player. So I think it'll be interesting to see how Pete handles a big man that is really opposite to what Badunga does. So I think it'll just be cool to see that matchup specifically, but this will just be a great matchup in general to watch. The whole game should be an awesome game, and I will be really interested to see if Pete can bounce back in this one after his rough game on Monday night. Next, I have the Auburn versus Arkansas game circled for Saturday. This game should just be a very high-paced and high-scoring game that I'm more looking forward to just because of the offensive end. Both teams have been playing much better ball here recently, especially Auburn. They had a really bad start to the season and have been playing much better ball here, at least in the past month. But I personally think Arkansas will win this one pretty comfortably. I just don't think that Auburn should be counted out per se. Arkansas is the more talented team. They have a much better backcourt in my opinion, and I think that will give them the edge in this matchup. However, both teams really like to play fast, and I think that that can certainly create some chaos and could set us up for a really good game. However, I fully expect the Razorbacks to take this one home. I am just looking for a really high-scoring game and for Auburn to at least keep this one competitive and close till the end. The last game that I have pointed out on this Saturday slate is the Gonzaga and Santa Clara game. This is a matchup that I had actually pointed out in my first episode while I was going over my top 25 rankings. I had personally said that I think Santa Clara is absolutely a team that can rival Gonzaga and St. Mary's for the West Coast Conference Championship, and it certainly looks like they are trying to at the very least. While Santa Clara is definitely not as talented as Gonzaga, Gonzaga can definitely struggle on some nights, and we saw that in full form against Portland last week where they dropped that terrible game to a really bad Portland team. I do think that that was a bit of an outlier. Like I said, Portland is a really bad team, but they shot an incredible clip from the field that night and from deep as well, so I do think that that was a bit of an outlier, but Santa Clara is a much better squad than that Portland team. If Gonzaga wants to pull this one off, they need to show up ready to play and need to realize that they can absolutely lose this game if they do not. Currently, the Zags actually sit a half game behind Santa Clara in the West Coast Conference standings, so if Santa Clara can pull this one off, they will be sitting in the driver's seat of the conference lead, making this game an absolute must-watch. But that is all I have for today's episode. I appreciate everyone who decided to tune in to today's episode, and if you enjoyed, go ahead and leave a like, subscribe, and join us back on Sundays and Thursdays for new episodes.